Have you ever noticed how much time some Christians spend talking about heaven, glory, and eternal rewards while completely ignoring what they're supposed to be doing right here and right now? It's almost as if the more supernatural the claim, the less they feel responsible for actually living the values they claim to hold. Welcome to Mythologizing the Bible, where we'll be taking a look at 3 readings from the Christian Bible through the lens of sacred myth. As we reflect on the readings for the 5th Sunday of Easter, we're taking a hard look at the tendency to replace action with empty promises, to focus on some hypothetical heaven instead of fixing what's broken right here on earth. In this episode, we're asking, what happens when we strip away the mystical, the miraculous, the someday promises, and instead start focusing on the values that matter right now? Because if Christianity is supposed to be about love, compassion, and justice, then we can't wait for a future paradise. We need to start living those values today. So grab a comfy seat, a glass of your favorite beverage, and let's look at some ancient stories together in this edition of Mythologizing the Bible, where we'll be exploring the readings from the 5th Sunday of Easter, Cycle C of the Roman Catholic Lectionary. In this series, we're exploring readings from the Bible through the lens of sacred myth, looking for interpretations and lessons that don't demand a belief in the supernatural. What that means from a practical standpoint is that we will assume that these stories and writings are fiction, written by pre-scientific people who were trying to make sense of the universe. Now, you might agree with the lessons I find, but I encourage you to look for something that rings true to you. Part of the beauty of understanding these writings as sacred myths is that we're free to interpret them for ourselves. We're free to learn the lessons that we need right now. So with that, let's dive in. As I said, tonight we'll be looking at the readings for the 5th Sunday of Easter, Cycle C. Our first reading is from Acts of the Apostles. It's chapter 14, verses 21 through 27. Our second reading is from the book of Revelation. It's chapter 21, verses 1 through 5a. And our gospel reading is from John. It's chapter 13, verses 31 through 33a, and verses 34 and 35. Now, we'll start by going through all 3 of the readings, then we'll look for the messages and the main lesson in each one. Finally, we'll bring everything together, look at what it means for us today, and talk about where we go from here. And with that, let's begin. Our first reading is from Acts of the Apostles. They preached the gospel in that city and won a large number of disciples. Then they returned to Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch, strengthening the disciples and encouraging them to remain true to the faith. "We must go through many hardships to enter the kingdom of God," they said. Paul and Barnabas appointed elders for them in each church, and, with prayer and fasting, committed them to the Lord, in whom they had put their trust. After going through Pisidia, they came into Pamphylia, and when they had preached the word in Perga, they went down to Attalia. From Attalia, they sailed back to Antioch, where they had been committed to the grace of God for the work they had now completed. On arriving there, they gathered the church together and reported all that God had done through them and how he had opened a door of faith to the Gentiles. Our second reading is from the book of Revelation. Then I, John, saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. He who was seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. And our gospel reading is from John. When Judas was gone, Jesus said, Now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will glorify the Son in himself, and will glorify him at once. My children, I will be with you until only a little longer. A new command I give you. Love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. All right, so let's go back now and take a critical look at these readings and see what learnings and lessons we can find if we dig around just a little bit. So our first reading was from Acts of the Apostles. And when we look at this reading, it's like we're seeing the blueprint for how the early church tried to solidify its power. Paul and Barnabas travel from place to place, checking in on the little communities they've planted, and they drop the names of every city as if that makes the story more credible. It's a classic storytelling technique, right? Name specifics to make the tale feel more real. But what's missing here is any real evidence of what they allegedly accomplished. We're told that God did amazing things through them, but we're not given a single concrete example. That's kind of a red flag. When people are more interested in reinforcing supernatural claims than providing real-world proof, it's a good time to ask some deeper questions. The other tactic they use is the classic suffering as a badge of honor trick. Paul and Barnabas don't just warn their followers that they might face hardships. They frame it as a requirement. We must go through many hardships to enter the kingdom of God. It's manipulative and deeply unsettling because it primes people to accept mistreatment and abuse as proof that they're on the right path. If you can convince people that suffering is evidence of righteousness, you can convince them to put up with almost anything. It's a setup for creating submissive, obedient followers, a population that's absolutely primed to accept whatever the leadership dishes out, no matter how harmful. Then there's the way they set up leadership in these communities. Paul and Barnabas appoint elders. Not the people who live in that community and worship in that community. Paul and Barnabas appoint elders. They don't provide any rational criteria for why these people are chosen. It's just God made it happen. That's not a reason. That's a cop-out. When someone claims that their authority comes straight from a higher power, they're basically saying, don't question me. I've got divine backing. This kind of claim it's still used by religious leaders today to justify decisions, to squash dissent, and quite frankly, to maintain control. But real leadership doesn't need to hide behind God. Real leadership should be transparent. It should be reasoned and open to accountability. So the main lesson I got from our first reading is that supernatural claims shouldn't replace valid reasoning. If we take away the supernatural claims, we're left with a much clearer picture. Paul and Barnabas wanted to keep people in line, wanted to keep them obedient and keep them convinced that their suffering was part of God's plan. But we don't need supernatural claims to make a rational, reasonable argument. If something is truly good, fair, and just, well, it can stand on its own merit. We shouldn't accept God said so as a replacement for sound reasoning, for accountability and real-world evidence. because supernatural claims shouldn't replace valid reasoning. Our second reading was from the book of Revelation. Another weird one from the book of Revelation. When we read this passage, we're sort of stepping into this vision of what they thought was a perfect world that will supposedly come to pass someday. A new heaven, a new earth, a new Jerusalem. I suppose it's a compelling image for some people. Who wouldn't want a world where there's no more suffering, no more death, no more tears? But here's the catch. The promised reward only seems to come after enduring all the pain and suffering of life. And while some interpret this as a comforting message, it's also a dangerous distraction. It's sort of a classic bait and switch. Endure hardship now, and you'll get paradise at some point later. Yeah. But what if, instead of waiting for some magical world to appear after we die, what if we focused on creating a better world right here, right now? This passage is often touted as proof that God will eventually make everything right. But that mindset, it can lead to complacency. Right? Why fight injustice if God's going to handle it in the end? Why work to alleviate suffering if we're just passing through this life on our way to a perfect afterlife? This is how promises of eternal rewards can actually prevent positive action in the present. It's easier to sit back and just wait for divine intervention. It's a lot easier than rolling up your sleeves and getting to work. And that's the real danger here. When we're so focused on some future paradise, we stop seeing the suffering that's right in front of us. We stop recognizing our own power to make a difference. What's I guess especially troubling, at least to me, is how this promise of a new world, a better world, how this promise was weaponized by the church. It's been weaponized by the church for centuries to keep people in line. Over the centuries, clerics told people to accept poverty, oppression, and suffering with the assurance that it would all be made right after they were dead. That's convenient, huh? Meanwhile, the people in power, including most of those in the clerical class, enjoyed the comforts and privileges of this world, while everyone else was promised the next. It's a brilliant con, if you think about it. Promise them everything their heart desires, but only after they can't ask for a refund. But what if we turn that around? What if we just flip the script entirely? What if instead of waiting for some mythical new earth, what if we start building a better world right here, right now? So the main lesson I got from our second reading is that promises of eternal rewards shouldn't replace positive action in the present. This reading from Revelation paints a vivid picture of a perfect world to come. But it's a dangerous distraction if it keeps us from taking action in the present. I keep saying that over and over again. What are we doing right here, right now, in the present? We don't need to wait for some divine intervention to make things better. We need to start right now, together. Because promises of eternal rewards shouldn't replace positive action in the present. Okay, our final reading was from the Gospel of John. And this reading kicks off with Jesus talking about being glorified. And it's one of those sections that I guess sounds poetic and profound, but doesn't actually say much. The whole glorification bit is murky. It's wrapped up in abstract language about God glorifying the Son and the Son glorifying God, and if the Son glorifies God, then God glorifies... I don't know. It's a theological merry-go-round that Christians interpret as evidence of the Trinity. But what does it actually do for people in the here and now, which I keep talking about? What does it do for people in the present moment? Not much. Again, it's a distraction. It's, if anything, it's spiritual sleight of hand. But right after all that glorification talk, Jesus drops the real message. Love one another. That's where the focus should be. Not on glorifying God and the Son glorifying God and God glorifying the Son. And the focus should be on taking care of each other. Here, now, while we're still alive. The second part of the message is where the meat is. Jesus gives what he calls a new commandment, to love one another as he loved them. However, before I get into that, did you notice that the lectionary cuts out half of a verse in the middle of this reading? At the first half of the verse is, "My children, I will be with you only a little while longer." The second half that the lectionary skips over is this: "You will look for me, and as I told the Jews, where I go, you cannot come. So now I say it to you." Where I go, you cannot come. Jesus was, according to the story, he was getting ready to ascend into heaven. And he's saying, hey, you can't go there. You can't come with me. Which definitely doesn't fit what Christianity, says about heaven. That's inconvenient. So the folks who put together the lectionary, they just left that part out. Anyway, if they can leave out the inconvenient parts, then we can certainly strip away the supernatural framing. And what we're left with is a fairly fundamental human message. Show up for each other. Take care of each other. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't exactly a groundbreaking command. Most religions have preached some version of this for centuries. The difference, maybe, is the emphasis on community, on creating tight-knit bonds where love isn't just a feeling, but an everyday practice. Imagine if modern Christians focused on that instead of constantly worrying about whether they're glorifying God enough. Imagine if they just treated every person, as someone worthy of love, support, and care. Every person, immigrants, strangers, our trans brothers and sisters, people on the other side of the world who are suffering or are living their lives oppressed, our neighbors, as defined by Jesus H. Christ himself. Imagine if Christians did that instead of using love as a carrot for the worthy and a stick for the unworthy. Maybe that's the real kicker here. This passage may have started with talk of glorification, but it ends with a call to action. And yet, in so many churches today, we hear endless sermons about giving glory to God, while people sit in the pews, in the very pews, listening to those messages, suffering silently. People in those pews are hungry, are lonely, are grieving. The very people Jesus was supposedly telling his followers to care for, the people you can't overlook, the people right next to you. And yet you've got the vice president, standing up there and saying that being a good Christian is about taking care of your own first and everyone else later. But that's not love. It's tribalism. And it's the complete opposite of the message here. If Jesus had been as self-focused as most modern Christians are, there wouldn't have been a new commandment at all. It would have just been, take care of your own and fuck the rest. But that's not love. That's not community. That's not how we build a better world. So the main lesson I got from our gospel reading is that preaching about glorifying God shouldn't replace taking care of everyone. Okay? Jesus, he started with talk about glorifying God, but he ended with the command to love one another, and that's what truly matters. If modern Christians spent less time preaching about glorifying God and more time actually giving a shit about everyone else, we'd all be a lot closer to the world Jesus supposedly envisioned. Because preaching about glorifying God shouldn't replace taking care of everyone. All right, let's review the lessons we've talked about so far. In our first reading from Acts of the Apostles, the main lesson I came away with was supernatural claims shouldn't replace valid reasoning. In our second reading from the book of Revelation, the main lesson I got was promises of eternal rewards shouldn't replace positive action in the present. Finally, the main lesson I got from our gospel reading was preaching about glorifying God shouldn't replace taking care of everyone. If we strip away the supernatural framing from all of these readings, what we find is a whole lot of rational, practical, real-world guidance that's still relevant today. But that's the thing. Too many Christians get so caught up in the fantastical promises of eternal rewards and divine glorification that they miss the entire freaking point. Okay, Paul and Barnabas, they wanted people to stay in line. They wanted them to endure suffering and obey leaders because God said so. John's vision in Revelation promises this perfect future world after you're dead. But Jesus, while allegedly talking about glory, actually gave a command to love one another right here, right now. So the good stuff, the humanistic stuff, the let's build a better world together stuff is in there. We just have to be willing to peel back the supernatural fluff and get to the heart of the message. Because when you stop waiting for divine rewards and start living the values that truly matter, you might just find that the real miracle isn't somewhere up in the sky. The real miracle is in what we can do for each other in the present, right here, right now. So let's step back and take another look at these readings overall and see if we can figure out what these messages really mean to us in our daily lives. To do this, I'll try to answer two questions. So what and now what? Okay, so what? Why should we care about any of this? Well, we should care about this because Christian nationalists, they want to force the Ten Commandments and the Bible into classrooms, claiming they're bringing back Christian values, whatever the hell that means. But what they're really doing is distracting people with mythology while they cut funding for real-world solutions that actually help people. Programs for the poor, the sick, programs that help the most vulnerable among us. They're choosing fantasy over facts by pushing their version of supernatural claims at the expense of real-world solutions. And that's a dangerous game to play. This is important because they talk a big game about glorifying God, but their actions definitely say otherwise. Instead of lifting people up, they're glorifying themselves. They're pushing for laws that consolidate their power and strip away rights from everyone else. And they're using God as a cover story for their own greed and thirst for control. We should care about this because their obsession with eternal rewards, heaven, paradise, whatever, is a convenient way to ignore the suffering happening all around the world today. If they're so focused on getting a gold star in the afterlife, they don't seem to feel as responsible for making things better in the present. And that's how they justify gutting social programs and destroying safety nets while claiming they're doing God's work. This is important because the big picture here is that they're taking the humanistic teachings that once attracted people to Christianity, things like love, compassion, caring for others, and they've warped them into a dogmatic power grab. Instead of encouraging people to actually live those values, they're demanding blind obedience to a very specific, very authoritarian version of Christianity. And if we don't push back, they're going to drag the whole country back to the Dark Ages, where they hold the power and everyone else suffers for it. The last question I try to answer is, now what? What are we supposed to do? Where do we go from here? Well, we've been talking about how some Christians romanticize suffering, claiming it's a sign of righteousness or divine favor. But here's the thing. Most of that so-called suffering, it isn't real. It's a mindset rooted in scarcity, in the belief that if someone else gets something, it means there's less for them. And that mindset keeps those folks trapped, not just in their faith, but in their everyday lives. The reality is that we can also fall into that trap. It's easy to make choices based on what feels good in the moment, without thinking about what actually makes our lives better in the long run. But what if we challenged ourselves to think differently? What if we stopped choosing what's easy and comfortable in the moment and started choosing what truly aligns with our values and makes life genuinely good? Not just for ourselves, but for the people around us, our community, and maybe even the world. So with that in mind, here's your challenge for the week. Find even small opportunities to choose living well over gaining immediate pleasure. Right? Look for those small opportunities where you have to make a decision, where you can live well for the long haul or just gain some immediate pleasure. So what does that look like? Maybe it means skipping the impulse buy and actually setting that money aside for something else that truly matters. Maybe it's resisting the urge to scroll more social media and instead spend 10 minutes connecting with someone you care about. Or maybe it's as simple as choosing to listen to someone, even if you disagree with them, especially if you disagree with them. Just listening instead of shutting them down or tuning them out. I think this is important because when we make these kinds of choices, we're not just improving our own lives. We really are creating ripple effects. We're modeling what it means to live with intention, what it means to value those things that truly matter and to resist that scarcity mindset that it just keeps us small and scared and way too selfish. Now, back in mid-2020, so it was a couple months after the pandemic turned our entire department into a remote workforce, I found that I was more productive than ever. I was always on top of every assignment, and I was finding time to work on projects that had been on the back burner for months. Without the constant interruptions from people just popping into my office all the time, or all that extra time that I spent walking to meetings that were scattered around our 6-story building that takes up an entire city block in Washington, D.C. Without all that, I ended up with lots of time to just get shit done. Now, I was in daily contact with my team members, and frankly, they were experiencing the same productivity increases. So all was well. And when I had extra time, which actually happened a lot, I was able to do something that I wanted to do, like staying up on the news in my field or taking additional online training to update my skills and just other things that I never had time to do when I was in the office. But I discovered that not all of my supervisory peers were in the same boat. A lot of them were struggling to adjust to this new remote environment, and they really did miss the camaraderie of working together in a common office space. My team and I, we were doing great. So I could have just kept focusing on what was working for us and basically to hell with everyone else. Let them figure it out. We did. But instead, I chose to live well and not just focus on my own comfort by actually giving a shit about my peers. I actually started with a list of some of my fellow supervisors who I spoke with on a regular basis when we were in the same building together, but just rarely interacted with them now that we were remote because our activities just didn't have us crossing paths. I found a reason to reach out to at least one of those people every day. We used Microsoft Teams for video communications, and their profile would show as green when they were online and not in a meeting. So, I'd shoot them a text message or sometimes just give them a call, on a video call. It was amazing how many of them were just happy to see me on video, obviously, and just chat kind of the way we used to when they'd stop into my office as they were walking by. It had such a positive impact that I organized a virtual happy hour each week. I invited a couple dozen people to a Teams call. It was after work hours. I'd crack open a beer, open up the video call, and we'd just shoot the shit with whoever showed up. There were always at least a half dozen people on the line, and it provided another opportunity just to socialize. But it also provided a chance to talk about what they were struggling with when it came to this new remote way of working. I did both of those things, reaching out to people individually and hosting our virtual happy hour for a few months. Now, it really wasn't a big deal. I simply chose to do that instead of something that would solely benefit me and my career. And through that, I was able to coach a lot of my peers on how to more effectively manage their teams in a remote work environment. A year into the pandemic, I wasn't hosting happy hours anymore, and I didn't need to reach out to people just to chat because the entire organization was adjusting. By every metric that we tracked, the entire office of the Chief Information Officer, a few hundred people at that point, were more productive than they'd ever been. And I know that I played a part in that because I chose to reach out and not just watch out for my own. It might seem big now, looking back, but it really was just a small choice every day at that time. So this week, just look for those small moments, the ones where you can choose comfort or your own benefit, but instead you can choose growth. And you can choose to reach out and help others and see what happens when you take kind of that longer, more intentional view. Because living well isn't about suffering for suffering's sake. It's about choosing what makes life richer, deeper, and more connected for you and for everyone around you. Well, before I wrap things up, I'd like to leave you with one more thought. This week's challenge is all about choosing what truly matters over what feels good in the moment. And that brings to mind a powerful quote from John Wooden, the legendary basketball coach, who knew a thing or two about building character, both on and off the court. John Wooden said, "The true measure of your character is what you do when no one is watching." Let's think about that for a second. It's easy to make good choices when people are applauding us for it, or when we're getting some immediate reward. But when no one's paying attention, when it's just us and that small everyday decision, that's when character really shows up. And that's what this week's challenge is all about. Those little moments when we could choose comfort, convenience, or instant gratification, but instead we choose to live well, to do the thing that's in line with our values, even if it doesn't give us a quick dopamine hit. Because the truth is, living well isn't about suffering for the sake of suffering. It's about taking that longer view, choosing what aligns with who we say we want to be, and then showing up for ourselves and others, even when no one else is watching. All right, we've come to the end of this episode. Thanks for joining me. I'll be back again next week. But in the meantime, I encourage you to engage with our challenge for the week. But also pay attention to any important lessons you come across, wherever you find them. You'll create a more purposeful and joyful life, and you'll start to feel more connected to the world and the people around you. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Mythologizing the Bible as we did a deeper dive into the readings for the 5th Sunday of Easter, Cycle C of the Roman Catholic Lectionary. Remember that the real miracle isn't somewhere up there in the sky. It's in what we can do for each other right here, right now. The Bible readings used for this episode are from the Holy Bible, New International Version, NIV, copyright 1973, 1978, 1984, 2011 by Biblica Inc., used by permission, all rights reserved, worldwide. Thank you for listening. If you like this content, please consider telling a friend about it. The more people who hear the positive messages I'm sharing, the better. Mythologizing the Bible is a live stream series held most Thursdays at 9 p.m. Eastern Time on twitch.tv/thecodaproject. Every week, the audio of these Mythologizing the Bible presentations is released as a podcast. You can find both the podcast and the occasional video version of these presentations at thecodaproject.com. CODA stands for Creating Our Divine Alignment. When we learn to align our words and actions with our core values, that alignment feels absolutely exquisite. It feels divine. But it's a divine alignment that doesn't require belief in the supernatural. It's a divine alignment we have the ability to create for ourselves. To learn more, to subscribe to my mailing list, and to keep up on everything I'm doing with the Coda Project, please visit thecodaproject.com.